Well, he's going there because his country is fighting for its life against an invasion. As simple as that. And he is shining a light, not only on that invasion, but he's shining a light on the backdrop to this invasion, which indeed that Russia has been conducting a war against Ukraine, trying to break it up since 2014. And indeed that Russia has effectively been supporting the Assad regime's war on its own people in Syria and blockading the UN Security Council for years, while war crimes were committed in that theater. So when he says to the UN, well, he does two things. First of all, obviously there's a short term here, which is support Ukraine. Make sure that it can continue to stand against this invasion. But then he's saying beyond this, if you have a reason to exist, you need to reform yourself now. Peace must be dominant. And he is quite rightly saying that the reason why we can't get peace, the reason why we can't get a protection against war crimes and invasion is because right now you have one powerful member in the Security Council who can blockade it. Now, I'm not sure there's an easy solution to that. In fact, I know there's not an easy solution to that. But if you do not highlight the issue, as Russia is attempting to bury its war crimes right now, so you will be burying the problem that we will face for years to come. Or again, as Zelensky put it, you need to punish this war criminal, this biggest war criminal, so other potential war criminals will not do the same. There's not, and again, we need to be honest here. You'll note that there was also reference to another step, which is largely symbolic but important, which is to try to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. Now, if that was to be successful, and there is a mechanism for that, the 2/3 vote of the General Assembly, it would be a very powerful signal. But there's no mechanism to expel a member of the Security Council, and Russia knows that. However, I don't want to go down the road of saying, therefore, everything is futile.
Yeah.
Because what has happened today, and what is continuing to happen, is by highlighting the issues that are here, by highlighting the killings, the torture, by highlighting the rapes, you are highlighting the fact that even though this country sits on the Security Council, even though this country, as Zelensky noted, will use all its disinformation to turn black into white, it must be held accountable, at least morally, and to an extent politically, even if you cannot hold it to account structurally within the United Nations. You don't get the proof until you carry out the full formal investigation, which numerous leaders have called for. But what we know as good analysts and observers is that which we have from satellite images, which we have from videos, which we have from witnesses, which we have from other information, which is in Bucha alone, more than 300 civilians killed by the Russian forces. We have seen the bodies. We have seen the hands bound behind them. We know they were killed before the Russian withdrawal, despite the Russian disinformation because of the satellite images. So, yes, in terms of being factual, we can get there. We can understand. Now, you're asking me how this plays out across the world. Gosh, I wish we had an hour for this. I think you look at the backdrop, one of the Russian victories, and I use that in quotes, in Syria, was a disinformation victory. Just as civilians were murdered there, Russia was able to cover up those murders. In this case, it's different. In most of Europe and in the United States and in the rest of North America, I think you can see the fact that thanks to Zelensky and thanks to basically the ability to now debunk the Russians, yeah, I think people realize what is happening. But in other parts of the world where Russia is pursuing this aggressively, and I say this as a guest on international media and other outlets, you can see contested areas like India, like Pakistan, like Thailand, like Vietnam, like Africa. Because what Russia does there is it tries to portray itself as the anti-imperial nation. The anti-imperial nation standing up to the West in NATO. And here's the irony. Russia's carrying out one of the most aggressive projects of any country. I don't know if you want to call it imperial or just simply being a conqueror. They're carrying this out in real time and trying to pretend that they're the victim. So this ongoing battle of clarity, of shining a light, which is what we've seen today, versus Russia's attempt basically to cover up that light, it's an ongoing process. And you've got to do it each and every day while this invasion continues and hopefully is checked. I'm saying that as a person. Now let me take it on as an analyst. George Orwell, the famous writer, once said war is peace. That's the secret of propaganda in 1984. And you just saw it all out from a Russian ambassador who I think personally and possibly his government have lost the first part of this war, are somewhat desperate. And just as we talked about a light being shone by President Zelensky and by the evidence which is being gathered, trying to extinguish that light by throwing as much mud as possible. Let me just go through a few things really quickly just to back up what I'm saying. The Russian ambassador said that there are no witnesses to the crimes committed by Russian forces in Bucha and elsewhere. That is a lie. There are multiple witnesses. He then went further. The Russians initially said that no one was killed in Bucha, that this was a staged incident. Now, they have to acknowledge that people were killed there, but they claim they were killed by the Ukrainians themselves. That is a lie. The New York Times investigation using satellite images, to which he referred briefly, shows that there were bodies there from March the 9th, 3 weeks before. And then he told the wider lies. Let me just put a couple up and then you can come back with it. To actually say that, for example, they are there to, cut out the malignant Nazis because Nazis run the country in a country, I'll remind you, led by a Jewish president, Vladimir Zelensky, in which many leaders are Jewish, in which he said another lie, that victims had swastikas burned into their chest. I can go through this again and again, but let me get back to the fundamental here. The attempt here is not just to justify trying to conquer Ukraine. It is to remove from our sight what has happened, which is the killing of hundreds, thousands of innocent people, sometimes in deliberate war crimes, and to make sure that we never as a world hold anyone accountable for that. That we bury history, just as those people were buried by the Russians in those makeshift graves in places like Bucha recently. You wake up and you're kind of resigned to it. And I know you are when you're trying to cover the news. But go a bit wider. The former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, who ironically was removed, Donald Trump was so close to the Russians, says we're at a hinge point in history. And I agree. Had the Russians conquered Kyiv and other cities, had they removed the Ukraine government, killed President Zelensky, the hinge point would have gone one way. But Ukraine still stands. The government still stands. Now look at the wider implications. There has been not just military aid provided to Ukraine, but there now is economic aid provided. And it is possible, I think probable, that Ukraine will join the European Union. There are other countries that will now want to draw closer to political and economic alignments. Finland and Sweden may become members of NATO. A country like which has tried to balance very carefully between the U.S., the European Union, and Russia. Does Turkey now say, look, we really can't count on Moscow as a partner? And does the European Union reopen the doors to Turkey for possible membership? All this has been reopened because one man gambled. Vladimir Putin gambled that he could win this war, invasion, crime against humanity within a few days. He lost that initial gamble. Now we go into phase B, phase C, phase D of the hinge point in history, which is not just about Ukraine, but it's about the rules of the game, and whether we get back to a sense of security and order for all of us.